Welcome, everyone, to Data Discourse Season 2, Episode 4. I'm really excited about this topic because this is something that is of a lot of interest to me. Today's episode's title is AI and the Law, a ground level look at what's changing and what isn't. AI obviously is a big topic across all industries, across the United States at this point, personally and professionally. But in particular in the law, I think there's a lot of potential influences, and we're on the front end of a lot of this. So it's not like we have a lot of history to talk about. It's probably a lot of predicting where things may go or some practicalities of where this is going to take us. But to further this conversation, two guests that I'm very excited to have this discussion with. I'm going to start with introducing Jeff Stiegler, who folks may know from prior episodes. Jeff's the director of digital forensics at Precise Discovery, more than 20 years in IT and certifications in mobile and computer forensics. Jeff leads technical investigations involving digital evidence across civil and criminal matters. He's testified as an expert in both federal and state courts. Jeff, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Pete, as always.
Thank you. And our second guest is Joe Schwerha, who is a professor of law and technology at Penn West, California, and is a practicing attorney with decades of experience at the intersection of law and emerging tech. His career spans commercial litigation, federal judicial clerkships, prosecution with a specialization in cybercrime and digital evidence. He's taught for institutions including the FBI, the ABA, and the National District Attorneys Association, and now focuses on educating the next generations on topics like AI, privacy, cyber law, and e-discovery. And I'm sure, Joe, I've shortened what your credentials and the experience are, but hopefully that was a good intro, and welcome to the episode.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It was really nice to get to see you again, and both of you recently, and I'm excited about coming on today and chatting a little bit. I have the privilege of being as a professor. I get to BS with people every day about whatever I want. So it's nice to be able to talk to some adults that are going to be able to kind of converse on a variety of topics. So can't wait.
Yeah, this is going to be a good episode. So, Joe, we know each other from many years past. We've crossed paths in the e-discovery, computer forensics areas across cases for, God, probably going back 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
And I know you beyond being an attorney, you specialize in sort of focus on technology and have morphed it through the years to now teaching what you know at Penn West University, which I think is a great way of taking your knowledge and putting it out there. But can you start us off by sort of telling us about your path from federal courtrooms to teaching law? How did you get to where you were? Give our listeners a little more of a background.
Right. I won't bore them too long, but I do remember when my first computer was 40 megabytes, an Apple II SE at Carnegie Mellon in the bottom of the library, back when they had just a few computers. And so my kind of background goes really before computer systems, which makes me kind of upset when I think about it. And to now where hopefully I'm trying to be on the forefront of how AI affects law and legal environment for businesses. So as you said, I started out as a young lawyer in commercial litigation, clerk for federal clerkship. And then I started being a prosecutor, and I way back when the cybercrime laws originally were enacted, right around the year 2000, 2002, because I came out of Carnegie Mellon and I was a prosecutor, I was kind of a little bit more advanced on the computer side than most of the prosecutors there, and I started getting into digital evidence and cybercrime. So I went to the National DA's Association's classes, and then they invited me back to teach those classes soon thereafter. And I just kind of moved up in the cybercrime ranks, teaching both for, when the magistrates were just trying to be educated in Pennsylvania, I would teach there. I was a prosecutor for 8 years, specializing in digital evidence and cybercrime. After that, I had a firm called Trace Evidence for a period of years, which we interacted with when I did digital forensics for a period of time. And then back around 2005, I took a job as a professor from being a prosecutor and private practitioner, but still kept my digital forensics practice for a period. And I've done that, just 20 years now. And over that time period, I've kind of evolved in terms of specializations. At first, I was all in cybercrime, and then that moved into privacy and moved into cybersecurity law and now the next one down the line is really artificial intelligence, which is fascinating. Actually, as you see, it's the I think I'm preaching to the choir when I say it's going to change the way we all do business as much as when the internet came online way back when.
Yeah, and actually that was a thought in my head. Have you in your career, except maybe potentially the rise of the internet, have experienced anything potentially as disruptive as where AI may go?
No, I don't, because we use the internet, and it was really just advertising, and then it became infrastructure, and then it really did change the way people did business. But it took a period of years before really the speed became, because we went from, do you remember the dial up and you remember the War Games movie and things like that? It did take a period of years. This comes like a tsunami, really. I mean, it's going to change things overnight. It has changed things overnight, I think. And with regard to that, it's just, I personally, I kind of really just started talking more about it about 6 months ago, really. And I started looking and seeing what the capabilities are, what the capabilities look like, where they're coming down the line. And then I just became infatuated with it and really have changed my focus. In fact, I'm actually going to be on a sabbatical in about a year and a half, where I'm going to compare how EU has implemented AI legislation versus the US, which looks like it's going to be a really great topic at that time, because they're taking very different avenues on how they regulate artificial intelligence.
I mean, it's going to be so hard to put a lid on this, though, because it's coming from everywhere in so many different directions. I guess one of my concerns just on that topic is that as much as you want to try to regulate it, how much can you in practicality? That's, I think, going to be a real challenge for any governmental agencies.
Well, that was kind of what the problem was with the big, beautiful bill, right? If you remember, if you just look in the recent past, when President Trump was trying to put a provision in that said basically, we're not going to allow any state regulation of AI for 10 years. It didn't make it through. So we don't have that. We're going to have a patchwork, at least for the foreseeable future. And it's really, I've watched the progress with regard to cybercrime law and cybercrime, and as it continues, and I've watched sort of the progress with regard to privacy law and how that has gone. But this is advancing so quickly, and is in every corner, and as far as I can tell, as part of every board meeting that's been had over the last 2-3 years. The law just simply, it's not going to catch up, and so we're going to try and figure out how to apply that advancing technologies to existing legal regimes, and then you'll see some advancements like we'll talk about synthetic identities and identity theft in certain states, and how it's been being applied in California, Utah, Colorado. A little bit will have laws with regard to AI, and a bunch more that probably are on their way. Hard for me to even keep up, really, because there's probably ones being proposed in every state at this point. But I think at this point, it's kind of like, how are we going to apply what we have and hope that we can change things as we can. But I think that's one of the reasons why they wanted to have no more state laws, because it's hard to figure out where this is going and how fast it's going. And if you're a business, right now you're having to comply with 50 different privacy laws. There's no general data privacy regulation, GDPR, and for the US, it's just Europe. And so now, if you have the same thing with artificial intelligence, it's going to be a problem. And I think if you look at, I mean, not that I'm an expert in the way the EU AI Act is going to be implemented as of yet, but it's just some of its provisions just went online, I think August 1st, if I'm not mistaken. And so you're going to see that it's going to really change just the fundamentals of doing business, not just the way we communicate or the way we advertise.
Yeah, and as you know, the legal field is so slow to change as it is, and reflect and to be reflective of what's happening out there in the world. And as you mentioned at the start of this is the tsunami. It's happening so fast. It'll be interesting to see how it tries to keep up. Or are we regulating things that were relevant a year ago and aren't anymore because of the fast-paced nature of AI?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's hard to get laws passed even at the state level, and at the pace AI is changing and advancing. I think it's going to be virtually impossible to adequately regulate in a way that doesn't artificially hold back its development.
Yeah. Well, and Jeff, you and I were talking this morning a little bit about, on the front end of digital forensics, and to make sure that our listeners understand what you do. I'll ask you here in just a second to explain what it means that you do day to day at Precise. But have you seen AI creeping into your day to day operations yet, or do you see it coming? Like, what's your perspective on that?
It's creeping. The creep so far has been, I'd say, maybe more negative than positive. A few stories I can, share as we discuss more. But I think what we discussed this morning, a lot of these forensic tools now are touting, oh, we have an AI feature that can do X, Y, Z. One of the big things is image categorization. Hey, throw a phone at this piece of software, segregate, all the documents, maybe pictures of weapons, drug paraphernalia, nudity, adult content. These filters and algorithms are very good at identifying these images. But now these exact tools are being touted as new AI features when there's not really an AI aspect to it for me. I think we discussed, what actually is AI. From my perspective, it's more of a logical input, logical output kind of scenario. Interpretation. The whole other side of that is, can it learn? Can you interact with it? And, for better or worse, change the results of what you get. So, I think it's important to kind of define what's considered AI and what's considered, just a software tool, because a lot of it is marketing right now.
Well, and I think a lot, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of what you're asked to do just in a day-to-day operation is, hey, we have a legal matter going on. We need to collect sources of information to decide, investigate it, to get through discovery and things like that. We haven't seen a ton of it yet, but it's logically coming that people are going to be going after AI sources. So, whether it's, I want to see what somebody interfaced on ChatGPT, or I want to see a Zoom summary of a meeting, or I want to, you go on and on about what that is. Even the collection of data sources in these places is going to be part of what you're asked to do sooner than later. It's just inevitable. And then it starts to raise the questions about how reliable is that? Is it controlled in a way that you could say, yeah, we can put high reliance on what this is, and that it represents what we think it is. That area is going to open up a whole new can of worms, if you will, about authenticity and what's true or not. And I think in the overall theme, to me anyway, that's a big issue we're all going to be facing. What's truth or not anymore? As AI is getting smarter, and you look at the videos, I think just recently they were saying all these people were fooled by videos of kangaroos jumping on trampolines and rabbits jumping on trampolines. And my wife's showing me this one morning, and she's like, look at this, look how cute this is. I'm like, that's not real. She's like, yeah, it's real. And it's like, no, but the videos are getting so real now, you can't even tell. And that used to be, hey, if you had a video of something, that was end all be all, that was the truth. You can't rely on that anymore, and it's going to be a big area for all of us to be concerned with. How do you say what's true or not anymore, evidence wise?
Yeah, it's not a matter of if, but when these things we'll start seeing cases like this. I mean, I can see it popping up in employment law. Someone uploading proprietary information to ChatGPT or whatnot, and then you get into the whole aspect of with these AI platforms, sandboxing. What is sandboxing? Is your data actually segregated? And that's a whole kind of reason why us as forensic analysts are pumping the brakes a bit. Because first of all, we don't trust any other entity with our data, and we shouldn't until that gets hashed out. So there's many things that are going to come into play here real soon.
Yeah. Well, and Jeff, so with this background of all these things happening, like, how are you in this evolving space in a landscape that's very unclear? How do you teach your classes about the intersection of AI and law? Is it more theoretical at this point? Are there any guideposts that you point people towards to say these are some of the things that we can sort of hook onto to guide us moving forward?
There's a lot really to talk about. I mean, so to break down the topic a little bit more, we're going through in higher ed, I think all of education, figuring out exactly how it's going to be utilized in day-to-day operations, how much we're going to allow people to use, how much is helping the educational process, how much, if any, is hurting the process. I'm in one particular camp. I'm in the camp of it's here. We need to teach the students how best to use it and how best to educate them while at the same time having basically infinite knowledge at their fingertips. So this is the problem, right? This is, a year ago, or even like 8 months ago, really. I mean, you could assign a paper on something to try and have someone learn about something. Well, right now it's, a short prompt to get a summary of the Civil War or Gettysburg or something like that. If you're a middle school teacher, and they're not really learning because they're just letting someone else do the work. By the same token, these are all tools that employers are going to expect these students to know how to use. And so just like you and I are talking, until Elon develops Neuralink to some extent, we still have to know the information about which we're conversing. We just are able to get more information much more quickly than we did before. So we're changing the way we teach. I don't have as much papers anymore. I do more oral presentations in classes. I have people, I personally, I think, are more on the advanced side on how I'm integrating into my classroom. I think pretty soon I'm going to do away with textbooks altogether. The only thing is going to be how to verify the information that's put together. I think RAG is going to take care of that for me at some point. And so it is a challenge to try and teach students now to learn when they have infinite knowledge at their fingertips, but they still have to know the concepts, even to construct an effective prompt. I mean, I think that's once you really get into utilizing the different tool sets and trying not just to get any answer, but to get the right answer and to get it in a format that you want, that's usable and correct, you realize it does take a lot of skill to get what you want. And it's not just a one sentence, one shot and get what you need.
Yeah, and you can't turn yourself over to the machine. Jeff and I were talking this morning, yesterday. I have a house with some property around it, and then we have another vacant piece of property sitting next to the house that we own as well. And so I was curious. I went to ChatGPT and I said, "Hey, what do you think my house with this acreage is worth?" And it asked me the questions. I gave it the answer, and it came up with an answer that I thought sounded reasonable. Let's just say said, "Oh, it's worth $100,000." So then I said, "Tell me what this piece of vacant property sitting next to me is worth," which is less acreage, has no buildings or anything on it, it's just a raw piece of property. And it came up with a dollar amount that was the equivalent of $90,000, comparatively. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So I went back and I said, how can a vacant piece of property without a house on it be worth more than a piece of property that's bigger with a house on it? It said, you're absolutely right. And it readjusted its number down. And then it said, do you want me to do property comparisons to validate this data? I said, yeah. And then it went back to the high number again. And so the point of that all being is that, like, it didn't say, I think this is right, or it said, no, this is the number. And without knowledge or experience or the ability to challenge it, to prompt it again, to be like, that doesn't sound right. You need to give me better information. You wouldn't have known. And I think that's going to be a challenge, especially for the younger generation, where they're going to be quick to be able to say, well, ChatGPT told me this is the answer, to accept it as truth, where it may be wholly inaccurate.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still at a place where there's hallucinations on a pretty routine basis, and it's not giving you the right answer all the time, or even most of the time, depending on what you're asking. This is where you get into more sophisticated prompts, and when we get into maybe having, from workflows to agents, where you're going to be using multiple LLMs to check each other and to check that these things exist. So like if you're doing case law and you have the ability to have more than one LLM check to see if a case exists, at least you might know that the case exists by having a double check, and that's helpful. But that's certainly one big thing, I think, with lawyers, not to move forward, but one of my fast and hard rules are, just treat this as a young person in your company, writing you a memo, and give it just about as much credence at this point. It can certainly, everything is probably going to be somewhat on point, but you can't absolutely trust it in any form.
Well, I get that all the time, that lawyers who know we're in a technology space understand that they need to be utilizing AI. They need to start thinking about it, incorporating it in their day-to-day operations, but don't know how or where it's appropriate. And they're very scared, and they should be, of the hallucination aspect and presenting a court with inaccurate information and getting themselves in trouble. And so they'll say, how do you use this? Where do you use this? And my general guideline for them, which I think sort of mirrors what you're saying, is that if you're trying to be creative, use it to its full extent. If you're trying to be authoritative, you better be very careful. And in that second category is where you can't just trust the content. Listen, if it's a creative argument, or if it's a creative marketing piece, or it's hey, this is a better way of saying this, you have creative license. You're not, you can make it whatever you want. That's a great way to utilize these tools and get used to them. But yeah, when you start relying on it for truth, and that's what it comes back to, what is truth anymore? And that line's getting very blurred about what you can rely on. It's a dangerous path to go down if you aren't careful with it. And I think you're absolutely right. It's a young person's memo.
Yeah, you're right. In terms, it certain things it does extremely well, recognizing patterns, summarizing things. I think when you talk about using it in the law, the idea of saying, okay, here's my 6 cases I want to use, write me a memo to support my point. I think it would do a great job of that, because you know what those cases are. Where you rightly say is when you say, hey, go out and find me 6 cases to support this and write the brief. And then if you're not going to go back and check those cases, you're running a very high risk of malpractice, I think, if nothing else. And let alone the privacy aspects of all this, right? I mean, confidentiality has long been a problem with search engines, right? The idea of what you're going to put in a search engine, or what even you give to a third party, like the whole third party doctrine, if you go back to criminal law on what's searchable by the police. If it's put in that you basically lose all your privacy rights if it's in a third party. And the third party problem has been, technology. We're putting everything in the possession of a third party, and so should we retain those privacy rights? Still an ongoing argument. But with client confidentiality, you have that continual problem of saying, I want this to, basically work, so that I think if lawyers had their druthers, they'd have one, kind of a note pen or something sitting on them, interview their client, take some notes themselves and say, okay, AI, snap their fingers and say, write me the demand letter, write me the complaint, tell me what cases supported this, and let's move forward. Maybe someday, right? But right now, you might say, go write me a complaint. I mean, that's certainly something I could see but you're going to want to double check everything it says. It's great at giving you a first draft, right? You have to double check everything, and sometimes that may take longer than actually just doing it yourself.
Well, and I think, as you mentioned before, the artistry is in the prompts and knowing what to ask and how to ask. And oftentimes your years of experience or your history or your knowledge on an area allows you to ask the right questions. It's the same way as being a prosecutor or a good attorney. Like, the questions to ask. Without that knowledge, you're not going to get anywhere. So to me, AI and a lot of these search engines are exactly that. If you don't know how to prompt it properly and continue to prompt it, and it's not just, I'm going to ask one question and that's it. It's to push the boundaries with it, and then ask it to validate if it doesn't seem like it's correct. You have to know how to do that. And that's going to be, I think, the sort of name of the game moving forward, especially for people who want to start implementing this in their businesses, is to know how to do that prompting.
Yeah, I mean, I advise people to do kind of what I've done, even, which is take on some micro learning, which is like kind of a new concept for people. But for instance, I subscribe to Coursera. I've been watching some micro courses on different aspects of prompting and so forth. Jules White out of Vanderbilt's excellent, has some different things on there that I do. And it's just a nice way to accentuate your knowledge. And I think that would help a lot of people, because prompting, can get really involved. You get the markdown language where you basically are dictating the exact format you want the output to be. It can be, it can be more involved, and it kind of just depends on what you're doing, right? I mean,
Right.
but lawyers are definitely going to have to, if nothing else, I mean, they have a competency, professional rule of conduct, right? You've got to be, just like they do for e-discovery, you're going to have to be familiar with AI if you plan on using it, or even if you don't plan on using it, because
Right.
if it's something that can be done a lot quicker and a lot cheaper with utilizing elementary tools in the AI field, then you're going to have to explain to a client why you didn't use it and why you're charging what you did.
Or be in a position to challenge or at least understand what opposing counsel is doing, because whether you use it or not, somebody else is going to, and you need to be prepared to be able to respond to that appropriately.
Well, just like search terms, right? We just talked about this. You figure out what search terms somebody's using. You hear about all the time. Somebody gets murdered. They go back, search the computer. They find out, they're Googling how to murder someone without getting caught. Well, it's the same thing with a prompt in an AI. I mean, a lot of AIs are. I mean, another. It's going to replace search engines. It already has in a lot of respects. The way they have operated already. Every time you search on Google now, it has that AI summary at the top. I mean, I think it's probably going to operate a lot in the way that search engines have in the past, but just be better, and not to skip forward too much too. But the real power really of these LLMs have come in with the APIs, and then when you have either workflows or you have agents that are actually going to accomplish tasks and work. I mean, it's a matter of time before we all just are telling their project managers and things like that are going to have real problems, because if everybody in our department has access to the same AI and they can then summarize what they've been doing on their computer and what emails they've been sending, you don't need to have someone as a project manager that's going to update the group. They will just be done automatically, and that kind of stuff is going to happen, and will decrease some jobs. I mean, for certainly.
Well, yeah, that's inevitable. I think that anybody who's telling themselves that some of these white collar jobs are safe or going to be untouched are kidding themselves, because it's too powerful, it's too efficient in a lot of places.
Right. It's funny, the term has come up called knowledge worker. I've never heard the term worker except associated with sex worker in the past, but now people are talking about knowledge workers as people that are going to lose their jobs. And I agree to a large extent. If you can, just like teaching, truthfully, I have an argument about the sister that's a professor at Liberty, and she and I go back and forth a little bit on how fast how fast teaching is going to change. I absolutely think it's going to change quickly in higher education in general, because I can have our chat robot now, if I give it sources that I trust, that will basically teach and individually provide an educational interview with someone on a particular subject matter, give them a quiz, tell them figure out what they missed, make a textbook on the fly for them just to understand the concepts that they need help with, retest them. It's stuff that I just can't do with 50 students. I mean, I might be able to do it with one student.
Right.
Can't do it on the fly. You'd have to give me a couple hours. But this kind of thing with individualized learning is popping up now, and will definitely change higher education as we go. I mean, there are other reasons why people go to college, and we could go into that at some point, but maturity, social interaction, being able to prove you can attend classes and make it through and accomplish a goal. There's a lot of those things, but you can also do those things while working and then educating as well. So we're going to continue to have multiple paths to careers, I think, that maybe we didn't have before.
Well, and if you think about just I guess the progression of how much information do we need to be able to retain in our brains when it's available to us so easily, 30 years ago, you went to Encyclopedia Britannica to find everything you needed to find about anything. And then it was the library, and then it's the internet, and now it's AI. It's like at some point, it starts to not make sense to retain all these facts. But it's about learning how to think critically and that's the tough part. How do you balance the two, where so much of education is based upon fact learning or memorization?
We all learn long division in elementary school, and then we all use calculators or our phones now. and that's just the way it's going to be. Jeff, what do you think about how do you think digital forensics are going to change with the advent of AI?
It's going to take a while because the general consensus, among the community, it's almost don't use it yet. I've firsthand seen, been involved in a matter where an opposing expert in a deposition under oath admitted to using an AI tool in his drafting of an expert report to the point where he then admitted that the AI tool probably changed the contextual meaning of the report, basically invalidating. I mean, he more or less committed perjury because of the AI tool. And so you can imagine it's going to, I see it weeding out some of the maybe less skilled, lazier examiners that trust the tool. Right now I may use it to help me write some Excel formulas, ask me to, explain a terminology a bit different, but to rely on it to write a report under oath, that's foolish. So I think the education, and I think a lot of these, there's always a discussion in the community. Hey, I'm just graduating from college with a DFIR degree. How do I get into the field? I'm good at this. I'm good at X, Y, Z. I know Python. I wrote code to do X, Y, Z. And now AI is being such a part of the software development. I mean, AI coding is a whole new thing to the point where, I've seen some of these programs in person, like, okay, well, it looks right, but if you drill down, look, basically the equivalent of the code telling you that 2 + 2 = 5. So, there's a lot of flaws, and it's going to rely on people fact checking, and I think that's exactly what us as forensic people are good at. So I think if any more, we're probably hesitant than a lot of industries. But I see on the other side maybe e-discovery being a better fit for a lot of these tools, because there is a big difference between e-discovery and forensics, and I think right now the value in AI may be more on the e-discovery side.
Well, I also think, to add on to Jeff's point, something that a good forensic examiner does that can't just be automated is sort of intersecting human behavior with data analysis and generation. And so, a lot of times it's interpreting what's the data telling you that's a likely human behavior that is related to it, knowing the facts of the case, the age of the person, where they live, all kinds of things. And some of that is just life experience that tells you, hey, if I see someone with an AOL email account, I probably can tell you that they're going to be older.
Mm.
I don't need to look at anything else. It's practicality. You know that. And so there are things, I think, from Jeff's perspective, and maybe you disagree with me, but I think that human behavior and understanding how people interact with their devices and things like that also comes into this heavily. You think that's accurate, Jeff?
Oh, always. That's a lot of times we're trying to explain to attorneys, to clients, hey, whether you think you have digital evidence or not, or where it exists, you probably honestly don't know what you're talking about. An email doesn't really exist, on your phone. There's other ways to go about getting it and verifying it's legitimate and everything. I'm kind of waiting for the influx of calls about someone's distributing material of me that I think is AI generated, or even, hey, can you verify? We still get common, oh, can you zoom and enhance on these videos or images? And there may be another one aspect of quote unquote forensics that may be a good fit for AI, because us as humans can't, we can logically think what might be in between the pixels of a picture, but you throw a supercomputer at it that has been analyzed a million pictures the same way with different lighting and whatnot. I would at some point probably trust the computer more than an individual for some things like that. So I think maybe I see some niche uses for it, but it's never going to be here's my evidence, summarize it and validate it for me. You got to have one or the other, I think.
Yeah. Well, and one more point on this topic before we jump to talk a little bit about cybercrime and emerging threats. we've used the example, Joe, before of Zoom meetings, right? So Zoom has gone from a video conferencing platform to an AI platform as much as anything else at this point. And it's great. You do a Zoom meeting, you use that AI summary tool. It gives you, a summary of what you talked about and action items for who's going to do what next. You start to think that, so that's a very powerful way of capturing, meetings in real time and stuff like that. But inevitably, we haven't seen it yet, but it's going to happen. I use construction because they have daily meetings and, project reports and things like that. So they do their daily reports. People are going to just copy and paste these Zoom meetings and make them part of the official record. And then years later, going to go back and say, well, that's not what we said. Well, that's what you submitted. And Zoom's not going to get it right all the time.
No, I agree with you. In fact, I teach via Zoom for some of my online classes. We could use Teams, we could use Zoom. I like Zoom. And it does summaries. And I typically don't allow recording in my classes just because I don't want my examples to be taken out of context, put it that way.
Yeah.
But I've kind of reluctantly just said, okay, with regard to the Zoom summaries, but just because it's just so helpful to the students as a learning tool. That being said, you have an authentication issue, right, with using a summary like that. Now, the example you gave was that they basically put it in their own report, so you would be able to interview them as to saying, is this what happened? This is what I heard. They'd be able to authenticate their own report. But if it's let's say it's just a Zoom summary that you are getting off someone's computer, and they're going to, you're going to need someone to say it is what you purport it to be in order for it to satisfy the rules of evidence. Again, it's kind of like just like a young associate's summary of the meeting, and it probably is right, but if the whole meeting is about, how we went to, a meeting in this particular place, then I would trust it to be, accurate, that everyone would have heard that, and you probably could authenticate it. If it's like, hey, this happened at 8:46 in 2 or 3 seconds, and no one else is able to remember that, I'd be curious to see whether you could get that into evidence in a court, because I think it'd be hard.
Yeah, and I've even seen Zoom summarize things to say the team argued over what's argued. Zoom interpreted it that way because there was lively discussion around it. But now, if that's part of a record, you can, some lawyer will take that as a juicy bit of information somewhere down the line, saying, "See, even you guys were fighting over this point." So,
Yeah. No, you're right about this. It's just, again, it's another person's summary, and you're going to have trouble depending on how you'd want to use that later on. I mean, that's why, with a lot of meetings, I don't know what you guys do with internal meetings, but different groups that I belong to, a lot of times we'll have minutes of meetings, and those minutes get distributed, and everyone's eyes can be put on them, and then you can decide whether or not something was accurate or not. And maybe at that point, then if they put the Zoom summary in those minutes to be proposed to be sent around for comments, then somebody might say, no, we didn't talk about a meeting in the North Side. We said it was on the North Shore, and
right.
And that's a totally different place, and things like that. But again, even there, how many people really read the minutes of the
right?
No, it's like the consents we all read on downloading an app. We never really read those things.
Yeah, they only become relevant when there's a lawsuit years later, but then it's real relevant, and they're picking apart every word that's in there, and then that's where it's going to get all fuzzy about, again, truth or not truth, what's accurate or not,
contract of adhesion and all that fun stuff. You get that
right.
law school concepts.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to open up a whole new areas of authentication on multiple levels is going to become a big issue, I think.
Yeah, and not to speak too much, but you guys remember, when Discovery started out with emails and everybody was going to Loudoun County with AOL and, running subpoenas through there for law enforcement. I wonder how it's going to work with AI. I mean, when, who's going to authenticate when someone says, no, I didn't prompt that. I don't know where you got it from. Are they keeping these records at all? I don't even know. I mean, if anything is kept.
Yeah, I mean, they have to be because your chats are available for you to go back to. Well, I'm more familiar with ChatGPT, so you can go back up and pick up a chat that you left behind. So somewhere it's being kept. You know,
I,
if it's
I would kind of assume it's in the typical, oh, we keep the data, but it's not very long, but we keep, we might keep records that you had an interaction with it, but as far as what that specific interaction with it, probably down to the days, and it would require a formal subpoena or court order to even get that.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, you use ChatGPT some, then is what you're saying. And what they have projects, right, within ChatGPT that you
right.
can keep. And so one of the things I'm just trying to get better at really is basically customizing my own GPTs for different aspects. Like one might be for research, one might be for for emails, one might be for just other things I want to learn. That's one of the great things about being a professor is I can kind of pick out the things I want to learn, and then I get to talk about it in class, and luckily get to talk with you guys about things like this. It's awesome. One of the nicest things I've ever been able to do. I have outlines of different things. I became a certified information privacy professional through IAPP like last year or the year before, I forget, because I just wanted to do it. And within that, I kind of have their body of knowledge. I made my own body of knowledge. I have emails, and I've been looking for a way for a long time to try and kind of keep up on the things that I see. We're all getting bombarded with information with a fire hose, right?
Right.
But what do you pick out to want to keep and retain? And so I've been trying. I think I'm going to use Notebook LM, but I wanted to have an outline that was associated with an email and probably an X handle that I could just forward this information to an email, and I would filter it through an AI agent to then put it in my outline. Just figure out where it goes, and it might be wrong, but at least it's getting in there. Just the stuff I think is cool, because I save stuff on like 5 different platforms, and it's really hard to keep track of everything.
Well, there's your new business idea. You need one consolidator that you own the information that connects to the various platforms to share it when necessary. But yeah, like I know with ChatGPT, for instance, you can have different profiles. So for me, we have multiple business lines. So maybe I'm doing marketing for lawyers one day, or we're doing, jury research another day, we're doing e-discovery another day. So, in each of those profiles, I have already told it, here's who I am, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, and you can keep filling it. So you go back to that profile, and that's been kept for months. Now, whether that's living on my computer, on their computers, a combination, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can imagine people, what they choose to train the AI with, on a particular project, because, a lot of people have been starting to say, I should just load all my papers into a particular GPT for myself, so that when I want to write something, they can draw on the things that I've written already and be able to, they kind of know, and they know my writing style as well.
Right.
And so what people choose to upload and what they then would know about, you impart some knowledge of that for evidentiary purposes, I would think.
Yeah, or expert credentials and arguing expert credentials. If somebody says, I'm an expert in X, Y, and Z, they put it in there themselves, and that's one of their profiles. And then they come back and say, that's not their level of expertise. Is that evidence to impeach them with? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. I don't, that kind of, well, certainly the things that Jeff was talking about in terms of cross-examining people on reports, if they utilize an AI to draft it, is going to be very interesting. I think everyone's going to be using it for a variety of aspects, but when you have to testify in court about something as your own knowledge, you better know every aspect of that piece.
Right.
And so, again, using it to make a draft, great, but anything beyond that, playing with fire.
Yeah, I think it should be standard included language and, kind of the cross-examination of, unfortunately, I'm going to have to be the bearer of that, the answer to that. But, that I've seen enough in how long to just already be concerned that there might be people out there using it for, not its intention or beyond its, reasonable means.
Well, in Jeff's case that he cited, it was so bad, the guy was disagreeing with sentences in his own report. And they kept saying to him, they're like, but this is your report. He's like, but Grammarly changed it. That's not what I meant. They're like, this is your report.
Right.
You signed your name to it. You verified it. You can't, hide behind Grammarly and say that it changed your meaning.
He actually said Grammarly changed this. It's like saying Siri. I mean, I'll tell you a funny story. My wife's on a plane right now back from Sicily. She's she works for a large confectionery company, and they had some projects there. And so I was asking her what her flight number is, and I was dictating this. I may or may not have been driving. I'm not saying for sure, but it came out. Amber, what is your flight number? My wife's name's Michelle, right? So like, who is Amber? I'm like, it's Siri telling me I should probably talk to this woman, Amber, but I have no idea what.
Right.
But like, that's the kind of stuff that happens all the time with voice recognition. But when you obviously, it's funny in that example, but if it's like a report, like you said, well, I didn't mean to say that. Well, that's too late at that point because you've already said this is mine, right?
Right. You sign your name to it.
Yeah.
And if you're unfortunate Western Pennsylvania, like we all are, and have our thick Pittsburgh accents, Siri does not recognize when I say bin.
Mm-hmm.
It says Ben. I can't get it. I've tried every single way of saying no. I mean BEEN.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about cybercrime and the emerging threat landscape. So, Joe, I know this is an area you have a lot more expertise in, but can you talk a little bit about where you see AI-driven threats coming in cybercrime, and just kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. Now, it's been a while since I've really been digging into cybercrime per se. I've been doing more with privacy and cybersecurity, but it's pretty much the same thing. Now, I think everything that we think is going to happen is probably happening. That is, in particular, one, the phishing, the video phishing and so forth, I think is going to be some real problem for people because when you can take a picture, upload it to Via or whatever Google's service is, make a video, tell it what you want, and then send that as a clip with an email saying, hey, I need your help, go on your computer, do this. And it's that person in front of you. It sounds exactly like that person. It's really hard, as you say, to differentiate between whether it's real or not. And I think what you're going to see is all the identity theft schemes are just going to be on supercharged because they're going to have personalized information that the AI is going to be able to get by scanning every source of information about you that they can find. And that becomes particularly troubling. This is going to continue to be a problem. Even in my family, I've talked to my wife about this. Like, we need to have a word within our family so that you can say it on the phone if there's ever a problem, that it's really you, because that's the only way I know of.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have, if they're going to have your voice on the phone, and it's only going to get better, right? So they're going to be able to answer questions in real time, act like they are. They're going to be able to cite things that they did in the past. You're going to have some kind of word like that that's just with regard to you, so that they know it's you. I remember way back in the 70s, when we had an alarm at the house. If the police called, you had to give them that word to know that it wasn't, that it was actually a false alarm. Yeah. I think I think everyone should be doing that for sure. Because
I think the one scam I'm aware of right now is targeting older individuals, identifying their grandchildren on Facebook and sending basically AI generated Facebook FaceTime chat requests saying that they're in jail and they need bail money wired to this account. And obviously people are falling for that. And then there's ones, involving the same thing, but with CFOs of companies saying, hey, you need to wire $2 million to this company, to this routing number. We just landed a new client. Who's going to blame, Jane, the secretary, for literally speaking with a version of her boss and assuming that is, an actual request. These are real things that are actually happening.
I got a pretty good one. It was actually sent to me, I think it was last year. It was sent on behalf of the dean of my department, asking me but that's where it was good up until the point they asked me to do, which was purchase Apple cards and send them to wherever. And I'm like, fortunately, I could, I'm pretty good friends with the CISO here and stuff. And I just double checked to make sure, because I didn't know that person all that well, but I'm like, there's no way this person is asking me to do this. But all that information, I'm a professor, who the dean is, that's all available online, and if AI can look this stuff and become much more believable, it's scary. Like you said, Pete, I mean, it used to be picture was worth 1,000 words and video was gospel. Now video, and then video, well, you can kind of tell if the video is off. Now you can't. I wouldn't trust any clips on anything to be truthful about anything. And it's very hard. So now you went from this point where you're saying we have a problem with identity theft for cybercrime, for authentication of the individual, because if we're doing online banking, the only way you're ever going to do that is if you can authenticate the individual on the other side. That becomes very tough. So you have that bi-factor authentication where they're going to send you back different codes. That seems like that is working pretty well right now, but I don't know the technology well enough to see if someone can clone someone's phone and do it at the same time. Jeff, have you heard anything like that?
It's exploitable enough for high volume and high value targets.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there needs to be a reason and or financial and technical resources to accomplish that, which is, why a lot of that, I'm sorry, your phone isn't, mysteriously hacked.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that is no, it's not, unless you're, head of a state or, something like that. It's
right. Well,
not so much.
You can just get access to their iMessage account. For a lot of people, you would just become another device. How many people really watch how many devices are on their account that they're getting their iMessage? I recently went to a Mac from being on PCs for I had everything for a long time when I was doing forensics. Then I pretty much went to Windows with the university environment I was at. I went back to a Mac. And one of the things that I have really appreciated, honestly, is that when I'm logging onto things and we use this bi-factor authentication and they're like, well, we're going to send a text to your phone. Well, it pops up on my screen. It pre-populates when it goes, and I just press click and it enters it. And it's a lot quicker. Actually, that was really cool. But I never had that because it uses iMessage. I use an Apple phone, obviously, and that's how it works. But I just made me think about the idea of how if you could hack that, then you'd have a good shot at it. And on the criminal side, I think anything identity theft. But I think synthetic identities. I think you mentioned that, Pete, too, as a possible something you wanted to talk about. That I think is going to be a bigger thing as well. Because when you can start up a bank account remotely, you can start other things remotely, and it's becoming a real, even more of a problem. And when you can have people talk or act like they're talking on the phone to a computer, how do you know it's a real person or not remotely? I'll throw that out there. I mean, I don't know how you would do it.
Well, these AI chatbots are now having conversations. You hear people complaining all the time that when they're applying for a new job, the first level of interview is with an AI engine. And so, and again, we're still in the infancies of all this stuff. And it's like having a conversation with someone, albeit an annoying HR person at that point. But it's going to get better and better where, again, your average person won't be able to tell the difference. And it gets back to the videos. You can't tell with the eye test. With conversations, you can't tell with the ear test. It's like at some point, truth, reality, that's going to be the challenge. And the authentication, taking something and saying we can rely on this to make decisions in a courtroom setting. I mean, that's going to be a big issue coming down the pipe here. And I think I've heard some people say, well, the way around that is that you go back into older sources and find that information to say, hey, this is too old for AI to have planted it here, and that's how we can authenticate it. But you can't do that for every piece of evidence, and you can't do that for new evidence. There's going to be a real challenge at some point to say how it's going to require, in some instances, I think people like you and Jeff, if you're in the spot of looking at forensic data, saying, I think this is authentic and here's why, and it's an opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about summaries a little bit with AI too, and how that can be utilized. But like you said, it's just about when you use a forensic tool. I'm sure Jeff could talk for hours about this. You use NCASE or guidance or whatever. It's going to give you a summary, but it will be able to take you back to the original evidence. But as we said, if you're using a summary from Zoom, it's never going to be able to take you back to the original recording of the call unless you have an actual recording of that call.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think one important thing, it was interesting when you started this piece of the conversation off by saying you have a password for your family. I do as well. And it's basically, we've created two-factor authentication for our family.
Right. Yeah.
But it's the only way to really do it. And, and it's us being in the space to understand how sophisticated some of this stuff has come, that without that, you can't do it. I just saw something this morning that there's, just to give one more example of a email hack that's been out. So people have been emailing folks, telling them they've infiltrated their computer systems, the typical, you're going to have to Bitcoin me, information, dollars, because I've taken over your computer. But then they send a picture of their house and their address, and they say, I've been watching you, kind of deal. It's just AI pulling it from Zillow or wherever, or Google Maps or wherever it might be. And if someone's unaware that, yeah, that's where they got it from, they're like, oh my God, this is really someone who's watching me. And it's getting more and more personalized. So it's down that path of, again, they know so much about you, that's your online presence, that at some point it's like, how do you differentiate what's real or not?
Right. I got those. I got one for the business that we have. My wife's business. It was a picture of the front door, saying this is where your business is. We're going to tell everybody about it. But usually, a lot of times with men, especially, it's like they're going to say that we revealed you're watching porn or something like that, basically. And you just have to, you're kind of taking a risk that it's not a real thing, but it happens so often that it, rarely is. But you're right. But now you combine that with saying, I know you were at Walmart last night. I know you were at, because if they have access to your credit report at all, they can maybe get all this other information that sounds real enough. They just have a picture of the front door. I'm ready to ignore that. They tell me where I've been everywhere in the last 24 hours. A little bit more worried about that.
Well, and all they want is a little bit of engagement to know that you're freaked out. And then they're good scammers to socially engineer a fear in you to make you react to it.
Right. Are you a real target? Are you somebody that's going to react?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, at least now, to wrap this section up, what you guys described, there's a technical place that can make it more believable, but it's still mainly social engineering. I think a lot of these scams and everything are still people hooking onto people's fears. My grandkid's in jail. You're watching me. You've taken over my computer, and they're pulling. AI is making it easier for them to be able to pull bits of information and make it seem real, but it still comes back largely to the social engineering. These scammers are good at doing that type of stuff. So best to ignore them, and best to have a family password. I think that's a smart thing to do and an easy thing to do, to be able to tell me the password. You don't have it, you're not real.
Yeah, right. And and technology is going to help guide against, the AI is going to help defend these things too. We haven't quite figured it out, but hey, someone says, your daughter says that she's in jail in Pittsburgh and needs a report, but you can see she's calling you on her phone, and Life 360 says she's at her friend's house in Mount Lebanon. You're pretty confident in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, gents, we're an hour in. So I think what I'd like to do to wrap us up here is just sort of talk about practical guidance and just some closing thoughts here about AI in general. What do you think are things to be on the lookout for? What are any guidelines we can give our potential listeners, who's largely going to be legal professionals, in either the use of AI or where it's coming, or importantly, maybe start with the question, can they bury their heads in the sand and say that AI is not something they have to be aware of or get familiar with at this point? I mean, I think we're all on the same page of that one, but I'll start with you with that, Joe. Is that something you think is even possible at this point?
If you can answer the question, I don't use the internet, then I think you might be able to say you don't have to worry about AI. But if you're that person that's off the grid and you don't have to worry about it, I think that very rare person might be able to answer that. Also, I think other than that, everyone else is already involved with AI, and whether they're making great use of it or not. Every business that they deal with is going to utilize AI, and you can only do yourself harm, and a lot of harm, by not becoming very familiar with the tool set. So that's what I would say.
Jeff, what about your perspective? Do you think it's something that people can continue to exist in this space and not at least have some familiarity with?
I completely agree, but I'll also add that they have every right to be freaked out and terrified about it, because as supposed experts and whatnot on this matter are learning more, I think we're getting scared. Hold on. Like I said, goes back to a lot of don't believe everything you see. Don't believe everything you see on an episode of CSI or a spy movie or whatnot. The real world does behave a bit differently. We'll try to do our best to guide you through this all. And like I think Joe mentioned, there's areas of this that we can absolutely take advantage of in a good way. Too. So it's not all bad doom and gloom, and it's not all, not all misinformation. There's going to be some good at it coming out of it, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to implement that.
Yeah, and I would say to add to it that it's scary, but it's exciting. The Industrial Revolution was scary for a lot of people. It put the buggy makers out of business, but it opened up 50 other industries that weren't even a thought at that point. I think we're going to see some of the same with AI. It's going to change a lot of things, but open up a lot of things. But we're just in that early stages, and it's so fast moving that nobody really has all the answers at this point. Nobody has, most people have very few answers. We have our theories and our ideas, but there's still logic at the bottom of all this, and just keeping an eye on it, I think, is the most important thing. For law firms, I still go back to what Joe said, and I think I said the same thing, which is if you want to use AI in your practices, think about creativity versus authority. Whatever you're getting back, consider it a memo from a first-year associate that might be very interesting, but you have to fact check it. You'll be fairly safe at that point to be able to start utilizing it and see where it fits in your practice. But Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciated this. Love to have you on a future episode as we dive into this stuff more and more to see what else has happened since we talked last.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. I appreciate very much coming on. It's good to talk with you and you too, Jeff. And and I'll just be doing more in this. So I'd love to schedule me in 6 months or a year, and we can talk about what's been going on since then. And there will be a lot for sure. I'm actually going to a conference on Friday in Vegas for 5 days, just talking about some of the advancements, and I will continue to give speeches, and whatever I can do to help or interact with you guys, I am absolutely more than willing to do. So thanks again for asking me on.
That's great. We will definitely take you up on that. And Jeff, thank you again for joining us and sharing a lot of your practical insights on what you see on the front lines.
Always looking forward to the next one.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for our next episode, and we will be talking to you soon.